what a year 2023 was. I graduated from college, I started a new job, I moved twice, I even got to do a bit of traveling, and I even uploaded like one semi-substantial video this year, so needless to say, it was a big year. Although my life was changing, my game playing habits really didn't change, so as per tradition, I'm back again to do the year review for 2023, where I review every game that I beat this year. Just as a quick disclaimer, just because I reviewed a game here doesn't mean I'm not going to do a review of it in the future, and I'm also excluding every Game Gear game I played, since those will eventually get their own video. Believe me, I'm still planning on making that video. Oh yeah, last thing is, all these opinions are my own, but feel free to leave your own opinions in the comments below. Without further ado, let's rewind the clocks back to... Metroid Zero Mission. With the discontinuation of the Wii U and 3DS eShops in March, I decided to grab many of the Virtual Console games that had become increasingly expensive. Metroid Zero Mission is one of the last 2D Metroids that I had yet to play, and like $7 on the Wii U eShop, I just had to grab it. I played the game over like 2 sessions, and I absolutely loved every second of it. It's clear that the game was made with Fusion's engine, from like the menus and the UI and stuff, but I think the game just plays better. It's more snappy, it's more responsive, Samus just feels better to control. I also really like the game doesn't hold your hand. It just gives you like a marker of where like the general direction you're supposed to go is. Outside of that, you are free to explore Zebes to your heart's content, which was one of my major gripes with Fusion. One of my other complaints with Fusion was the difficulty, which spiked right at the end and left me a bit frustrated, but Zero Mission had the opposite problem of feeling a little bit too easy. I did play a normal for what that's worth, but it is also the only thing unlocked at the beginning. At the end of the day, it's the perfect way to experience the first Metroid game, and it kept intact a good chunk of the game while adding a lot that makes it feel like its own thing, and that makes it a clear S for me. Balloon Pop. Okay, so you might be wondering, Diego, what the heck is this? Sometimes you like go to a thrift store and a game cover captures your interest and it's only like a couple bucks, so you think, okay, maybe this is a hidden gem, and those are being found all the time, especially on the Wii. The character design is cute, and it is what drew me in at the game initially, but I think the gameplay is just far too simple as a puzzle game, and it doesn't really provide a sufficient challenge. I mean, I really found myself getting bored. Like, the only reason, and I mean it, the only reason I lost is because my Wii remote died, and it didn't pause my game when that happened. The controls are awkward at best, and I don't really see myself popping, pause for laugh track, this one in again. F. Toree 3D. I'd been hearing a lot about Toree 3D, and everything I heard was positive. Part of a lot of those reviews brought up that the game was only $1, which made me skeptical because is it actually a good game, or is it just like good for the price? I am happy to report that the game has a decent amount of content, regardless of the price tag. The game goes for this like N64 art style, even retaining the bright colors many of those games went for, and the platforming is super solid, and it feels great to pull off, and there are even some bonus objectives for some replayability. You really can't go wrong with such a low price. I think it's worth your time. A. The Suicide of Rachel Foster. The Suicide of Rachel Foster is the first entirely story-based game that I finished where I actively disliked the characters and the story. The game deals with the main character who inherits a hotel from her family after both her parents passed away. The main character hates this place because it reminds her of her past relationship with her father, who she dislikes because her father was a... Well, YouTube will get mad if I say the words, so I'll say that it's a word that starts with P and makes it so you shouldn't be around children. Anyway, The game tackles the subject of her father and her relationship like super badly, to the point where it almost tries to make the father redeemable, and it's clear that he isn't worth that redemption, yet the main character like essentially forgives him, even saying lines like, "Your father had a big enough love for both you and Rachel," which just like comes off as gross. The story isn't something you can ignore either. The game is the story, and there is very little gameplay outside of it. Unlike something like Firewatch, I will not be showing this one to others. It does not deserve your time. It is like, if I could give a score lower than F, I would. But F.
You're not the first man.
To do what?
To try and stop me.
Hey, wait!
Bye.
Dadish 3. If you were here last year, you got to hear me talk about the first two Dadish games. I bet some of you were on the edge of your seat waiting for my third game review, so here it is. This game really puts a new spin on things. Okay, but like, for real, this game is much like the other games. It's a really solid platformer, nothing that'll really blow your socks off, but it's enjoyable in its own way. The only real thing I'll mention is the game feels a bit slower, a lot more waiting around for platforms or bubbles or cranes, and due to the lack of checkpoints, some levels really do feel like a slog to get through. I'll also mention that the spin that I joked about a couple seconds ago is actually pretty useful. It only occurs on the second jump, and it's a nice visual indicator of which jump you're on. This game is a good example of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I'll give the game the same review that I gave the last two games, which is an A. A Bird Story. This game is essentially like a $1 demo for Finding Paradise, which is a game I played last year, but I feel like it has very little to do with the story of Finding Paradise. It's a really cute story, although a little bit predictable. For the price, it's not a bad pickup. It's nothing really to write home about, though. Overall, it's fine, but it didn't really get anything other than an "aw, that's cute" kind of reaction out of me. It's the video game equivalent of Stopping to Smell the Roses, and I think that's a B. Rusty's Real Deal Baseball. I beat this game back in March, right as the eShops for both the 3DS and Wii U were closing. Rusty's Real Deal Baseball is the kind of game that Nintendo just wouldn't release nowadays, and it's mainly because they found a way to innovate buying digital games. Haggling is the name of the game, and it's super fun to do, and it ensures that the main character, Rusty, is able to be a better dad. Haggling is a super neat mechanic, and I don't think it'll ever be done again. Not to mention, the games that Rusty sells you are super fun, bite-sized minigames based on baseball, which is a sport that I do have some fondness for, despite not being an active baseball fan. All the minigames are consistently fun and engaging, and they even give you little rewards such as coupons and donuts that you can use to haggle with. Not to mention that Rusty is just a super charming character, being a down-on-his-luck store owner. I think the game is just perfect for the 3DS, and I'm glad I could play and participate in the haggling mechanic before the shops went down. The game shockingly gets an S from me, just from how uniquely fun the game is. 3D Classics, Kirby's Adventure. This isn't my first rodeo with Kirby's Adventure, and it certainly won't be my last. Kirby's Adventure is one of the best looking and playing NES games, and it got a 3D remaster. I'm not really well versed in Kirby's Adventure to know if there were any big changes to the game outside of the lessening of the lag, since the game is built from the ground up and not emulated. Don't get me wrong, the game is really good. Incredibly good, even. Probably the best way to play Kirby's Adventure, but I'm not really sure if it benefits from the 3D remake. I think it's good because Kirby's Adventure is good, and not because of the 3D effect. The 3D effect is so minimal that I barely noticed it while playing. I'm not even really sure what games I would have picked for the 3D Classics treatment, but it probably wouldn't have been this one. It's still good and worth playing, but it's not like it makes the original obsolete. Kirby's Adventure gets an S, but like the remastering gets like a B. It's not bad, but it's kind of unnecessary.
Sometime last year I decided that with the shop going down and convention season starting soon, I was going to buy all the Street Pass games for 3DS. I know that I probably won't get a ton of Street Passes from this point onward, but I thought it'd be a nice thing to have. MiiForce is one of those Street Pass games, and it's a pretty basic side-scrolling shooter. The thing that makes this unique is each person you Street Pass adds a gun to your ship, and the shooting properties of that gun change based on the person's favorite color. It is also a multi-directional shooter, so the game will put enemies all around you, and you use the L and R buttons to change the direction you're firing. Personally, the game is fine. It's really nothing all too special. I think the best part about the Street Pass games is the infrequent ability to play them, and getting something new to play each time. Each level feels pretty much the same, and they go on for just a bit too long. It's fine, but it's really the last Street Pass game I would play out of all of them. It gets a C. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the arcade game. The 90s loved its beat-em-ups, from Double Dragon to Final Fight to The Simpsons arcade game and even Ninja Baseball Batman. Check out last year's review for my thoughts on that one. You all know what a beat-em-up is. There's some enemies in your way, you don't want them in your way, try to get past them. The story just gives a reason to beat up those guys, and you keep beating up guys until there aren't any guys left, and it's pretty simple, and usually these games are 4-player, so it was always good to play with friends, so here are my thoughts. Meh. The game feels pretty samey. All 4 turtles look the same, and so do most of the foot soldiers. What you're doing the whole time is the same, with no real combos or special moves to pull off. It's just fine. Fun with friends, but it's nothing super interesting. It gets a C. Sunset Riders. I love Sunset Riders. It's one of the most unique arcade games I've ever played, from the aesthetics to the gameplay to the voice acting. It's just all beautiful. Sunset Riders is a mix between a beat 'em up and a shoot 'em up. You run through stages as one of the 4 Sunset Riders and blast your way through all the different enemies. I played this one back in the day with a friend in an arcade, and I was disappointed at the time that there was no good home port. In 2020, they finally released a home port of the original version, which is just fantastic. The game is just as good as I remember playing in the arcade. Each stage is unique, all the bosses are fun and challenging, and you can even play this game with up to 4 friends, which is just super fun. I highly recommend checking this one out. I'll leave you with some of my favorite voice clips from the game, but this game absolutely gets an S.
Marry me with my money. All right, ma'am. We won't shoot 'em. Hasta la bye-bye.
In the month of May, I got really busy with school and moving, so I didn't get a chance to play a lot of stuff. There is a video from around that time if you're interested, but, on to
BoxBoy. This game was good, and for $5, it's shockingly filled with content. However, despite all the content, I feel like I don't have a ton to say on the game. It's a pretty clean-looking and playing action puzzle platformer. Although the visuals are charming and the gameplay is engaging, the game is not the kind that really sticks in my brain very well. It's linear, and what you can do control-wise changes, but practically nothing stands out in the grand scheme. Gimmicks to levels are introduced and dropped at an alarming rate, the only constant being the blocks that Kirby can make. I just wish this was a little deeper all around, as even gimmicks barely hit their potential before being pushed aside. B. Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! This is by far one of the most satisfying games to learn and beat. This game pretty much lays out everything you need to do, and the goal is just to execute. Each fighter feels unique, and yet still challenging. It's by far one of my favorite NES games, and I cannot tell you how powerful it felt finally knocking out Mike Tyson. I haven't popped off that hard since I played Punch-Out on Wii. This is an easy S from me. Super Mario Bros. 3. This one shocked me. Like, I knew Super Mario Bros. 3 was good, but it's not this good. I was also genuinely shocked what they were able to do on the NES. Many games on the NES feel very primitive, so it's shocking when one is able to surprise me. There were many enemies that originated from this game that shocked me, like the boos. I always assumed they came from Super Mario World. This game is also quite beefy for an NES game. A playthrough could take you around 4 or more hours, and that's even if you know what you're doing. A far cry from the half hour it takes to beat most NES games. One thing that is also great is being able to warp to other worlds pretty early in the game with the warp whistles. This allows you to play a bit, clear a world, and then come back at a later time to pick up on the next world. The only part I really didn't care for was the constant reuse of Boom Boom, with little changes. The fight got tiresome after a while. I also really didn't care for the final world. At the very least, most of the levels, once they're completed, you don't have to play them again if you game overed. Overall, this seems like a game that actually wanted to show you all of its content, and it was all interesting and unique, which I can't say the same for many NES games. So this game is just an easy S rank from me.
Donkey Kong Country. Wait a sec. That doesn't look right. There we go. Much better. Or should I say much worse. You may be wondering why I would play an objectively worse version of a game I already own. The answer is, I've had this game as a kid and simply just couldn't beat it. I just wanted to put this game in its place and show that it couldn't beat me. This game is like 50% good and 50% frustrated. The game's hit detection is just bad, the screen crunch had me making a lot of leaps of faith or get hit by something off screen. The game also looks and sounds bad. It's far too dark to comfortably be seen on the Game Boy Color screen. You almost need ideal lighting. I think the biggest shame is that there aren't even that many unique additions to this version outside of the one new level and some mini-games, and some Game Boy printer functionality. Ooh, big whoop. The one addition I did like is that the game saves after every level. And I can tell there is a good game here on Super Nintendo, but it's handicapped by being on the Game Boy Color. You'd be much better just playing the GBA version or even the Switch Online version. It's not a bad game, but it's completely unnecessary. See.
Super Monkey Ball 3D. Wow, that sure was a game. It's not like inherently bad or anything, just like I felt nothing beating it. Imagine an obstacle course without many obstacles, and that's the whole game. The game lacks moving set pieces, or really any verticality in levels. Most levels are just flat squares with narrow pathways that you roll through without much thought, and by the time the levels do start to get the slightest bit interesting, the game is done. There is also a not fun Mario Kart and Smash clone also included, but as far as I can tell, they're single player only, so there's not even a point to playing them. The whole game screams forgettable, which is a shame because I love this franchise so much. It's an F. Balloon Kids. This game sure was interesting. It's a game where I'm like super mixed because at the core, the game is about floating around and avoiding obstacles, all of which is just super enjoyable, but later on in the game, they want you to do some platforming and do some boss fighting, neither of which I was like super stoked about. Like, jumping feels really floaty and awful, and they expect you to like platform with that? The boss fights are also completely unnecessary, but for like a 45-minute game at best on the Game Boy, it's pretty fun. It's one that I could just see myself randomly in the future running through just for the heck of it. If you're looking for some classic balloon fight action, then it is there regulated as a side mode, but this is the last time we would see balloon fight until Nintendo Land 20 years later. If you see a copy for cheap, it's a fine Game Boy game to add to your collection, and I would love to see it come to Switch Online. B. Frogger's Adventure, Temple of the Frog. This game has been sitting on my backlog for about a decade now. It was originally my younger brother's, but when his DS Lite broke, he gave it to me to play, and I've sat on it for years. Honestly, it's a shame I did. I really liked the game. It had just the right amount of challenge and unique gameplay. Frogger feels great to control, and the level design is challenging without being too difficult. If I had to complain about anything, running out of continues means you go back to the title screen, which is annoying. There's also this one auto-scrolling section in the sky that I didn't care for. And oh, the game is shockingly short, like an hour long, and then it's done. I really would have liked more of this kind of gameplay. This is also a great game that if you see it for cheap, you should definitely pick it up. You won't be disappointed. A great frog-type game. A. We Love Katamari Reroll plus Royal Reverie. I played the original PS2 game back in 2021, and I loved it there, and much of the game remains untouched. They added a small amount of content, which is more than the Katamari Damacy remake did. End of the day, that's fine for an HD re-release. And on top of that, the game was $30 at release, so if you wanted to play the game again and don't own a PS2, this is a fantastic way to do so. If you want a slightly more detailed review of the game itself, go check out 2021's year in review. Just a quick spoiler, I love this game. It's an easy S. Scooby-Doo Unmasked. I was doing a bit of traveling in the month of August, and with all that extra time on my hands, I decided to play some random GBA games, in case there was any gold in there. This game was not gold. It's mostly a boring game that feels loosely connected to the show in any regard. The game has 4 gameplay types, really boring and drawn-out platforming stages, roller coaster obstacle dodging stages, really drawn-out quick-time events, and decent enough boss fights with optional puzzles in there for extra health. Not that you'll need the extra health, you take so many hits before you die, and the only punishment for death is that it takes you back to the beginning of the screen you were already on. The best thing, and literally the only good thing I have to say about this game, is that the sprite art isn't half bad, but like everything else is boring and forgettable, and I'm not even really sure what I expected. It gets an F. Lego Island 2, The Brickster's Revenge. Another Game Boy game I brought with me while traveling, and this one is shockingly short, like you can finish it within 2 hours. The best I can describe this game is it's close to like an old school adventure game. You can't die, and your main objective is to explore and find out what to do. There is no puzzle that's like actually difficult or anything, and the game regularly roadblocks the incorrect direction to go. I did like some of the dialogue, and some of the interactions were a little funny, and overall, visually the game is charming, especially with some of the more detailed shots of the characters. But outside the visuals and the dialogue, this game is a pretty nothing game, with the only incentive to keep replaying is to get all the trading cards which you find scattered around the map. Not like the worst game, but there's very little to this one. This game gets a C.
Pokemon Ruby. This was an absolute delight. I'll be honest with you, I've had Pokemon Ruby for a really long time, but I never found the drive to actually finish it. Me and a couple buddies for a while were talking about doing a parallel playthrough of Generation 3 with the goal to complete the Pokédex. But this game was just so much more than I would have thought, rather than just playing through another Pokemon game. We got to mess around with all the multiplayer features, like secret bases and Pokeblocks. We got to mess around with the e-reader cards. We did a whole bunch of battling and trading, just like they did back in 2003, link cables and all. This was such a success that a parallel playthrough of Generation 5 has started within my friend group. As for the actual game itself, I loved a lot of the Pokemon designs, such as Spheal and Wurmple. I love a lot of the music, such as Meteor Falls and Verdanturf Town. I love that simple, charming sprite design that the games had, and I had fun learning everything that this game had to offer. I had a blast moving from Little Root Town to becoming the champion of the Hoenn region, and I finally understand people's love of Generation 3. It's an easy S.
Imposter Factory. My visual novel bias is showing again, but This one is by far one of the most ambitious stories I've played in a while, and boy was it a roller coaster of emotions. It's really hard to say what I think about every little portion of this game without like spoiling the whole thing, and I wouldn't want to do that for anybody. Do yourself a favor, play To the Moon, then Finding Paradise, and then Imposter Factory, in that order. I gushed about Finding Paradise last year, and I'm happy to gush about its sequel this year. It gets an S.
Kirby Slide Puzzle. It's a slide puzzle that came pre-installed on my e-reader from the previous owner. If you want to buy the actual card, it's like 80 bucks, so knock yourself out. The game actually is called Kirby Puzzle, but like, that's really lame. It sure is a slide puzzle though, starring Kirby. A real Kirby slide puzzle. Oh, the image is from Kirby Right Back at Ya, which is kind of neat. I don't really have any other information. Oh! And I beat it. Cool. Oh, spoiler alert, I guess. Ontamarama. This is the exact reason I love picking up weird-looking DS games. The DS is a console that had so many games that hidden gems were just bound to fly under the radar, and I'm happy to say that I would consider Ontamarama to be one of those hidden gems. It's a fantastic rhythm game where you click buttons, not only to the beat, but tap these little guys so that when the notes come up, you can push the button. The music in this game is amazing. Like, I can't understate that I loved every single track in this game, and they stretch a handful of genres. A good amount of the songs even had unique vocals, which you don't hear much on the DS, especially with as little compression as I heard. I love all the character designs too, with some of my highlights being Aria and Elegy. If I had one complaint, it's that the game's kinda short, but for like a rhythm game, where the point is to master all the songs, it's not much of a big deal. If you wanted a weird DS game and a fun rhythm game, this game cannot be recommended enough. S. Warioland 3. This being my first Warioland, it didn't disappoint. I was a really big fan of the way you progressed through the game, and that everything in the level wasn't fully accessible from the very beginning. I really liked how you could explore the entirety of the levels, and as you became more powerful, you could see more and more of the levels that you had access to. I also liked that the treasure you were collecting helped you unlock new levels, but like, not all the time. Sometimes the treasures were just, you know, treasure, valuable for no other reason. The only part I didn't get was, like, the golf game. Like, don't get me wrong, it's a good idea, but why is the only minigame golf? I also found it weird that golf was the only thing to ever spend your money on. So, near the end of the game, I had maxed out money. Like, there was no live system. You couldn't even die, which was nice, but I didn't like that there were so many vertical levels where you would just fall. And that would mean redoing a bunch of the platforming you just did for another shot at the same part. Sometimes that was even a boss fight, and that was even more annoying. A couple of the levels did leave me stumped, but I think if I wasn't so impatient, I probably could have figured them out. Most of my complaints feel like mostly minor nitpicks in the grand scheme of things, and generally I did have a good time with this one, so I'll give it a B. Quest 64. This game often gets a bad rap. I often see it heralded as one of the worst games on N64. Like, do you know how bad Superman 64 is? Because I don't. I've never tried it. No, don't get me wrong. It's not the best game I've ever played. But the combat is unique, and the music and visuals are nice, and the monster designs are actually pretty fantastic, being different from the usual RPG flair. Some of my favorites being Pinhead, Sandman, and the Werehairs. The combat is the most unique thing about this game. It's a mix between an action RPG and a turn-based RPG, and I think it works pretty decently. I do kind of wish that the magic spells did more damage, and I do kind of wish that the magic spells did more damage than your staff, so I had more incentive to just not bop things throughout the whole game, even though it was pretty fun.
The story itself is a bit generic, and I could tell that the game was rushed right at the end. Combat towards the end also kind of fizzled out. Once you learn Magic Barrier, it negates all magic damage, which is like exclusively what bosses use. But I do generally think I had more fun with this game than I didn't, and I'm glad the Quest64 official Twitter account got me to actually try this game, because I don't think I would have if it weren't for them. I think if you want to try something new on N64, don't go in expecting a masterpiece, but you'll have a good time is all I'll say. It's a B. Corsola Diving. Another silly little e-reader game, but this one's more of an actual game than Kirby Slide Puzzle. Not by much, mind you, but it's more of an actual game. In this game, you're Corsola, and your objective is to dive 100 meters. Collect bubbles to keep your air meter up, avoid tentacle and quillfish, or lose air. Control-wise, it reminds me of Balloon Fight, where movement is a little bit floaty, and every action needs a counter-action. I think the game is very enjoyable, and is definitely a nice bonus for owning 2 Pokemon cards. The game is also deceptively easy right at the beginning, but those last 10 meters will really give you a run for your money. It's an easy B. Dogtato-kun. I bought a funny-looking Game Boy Color game at a game shop for $5, and it ended up being a small bit of an obsession. This game single-handedly sent my friend group into a rabbit hole, since I decided to play this game while on call. While trying to figure out more information about this game, we found that on the Wikipedia, it read, in 2000, Japanese game developer Pack-in Video developed a video game based on the original anime series for the Game Boy Color. Problem was that the anime came out in 2004, which meant that something didn't line up. While we were in this rabbit hole, we found the anime, which was fully translated to English, and the official site is still active, so we sent them an email to ask why there was a discrepancy. Long story short, the game is based on a Garfield-like manga strip, which the anime was later based on. One Wikipedia page updated later, and here we are. Anyway, look at this frickin' cover art, and you tell me what kind of game you think it is. I know I gave you a little to go off of, but take a guess in the comments anyway. If you guess platformer, wrong, it's a repeat after me rhythm game. And in my opinion, it's pretty charming. I will say, there is a shocking amount of dialogue for what I would imagine is a game aimed at kids, but I digress. The music is nothing groundbreaking, but it's generally good. I think the dialogue could have charm to it if I could, read it. The most interesting thing about this game is the story, of which the game branches based on dialogue choices that change which characters you see, and which characters you dance battle in. It does give this relatively short game some replay value. The whole thing can be beaten in about 40 minutes easily, and the game doesn't challenge you in the slightest. I was playing the game with input lag, and I couldn't hear the game very well, and yet I was still able to clear each stage first try. But for what it's worth, I did really enjoy the game. I'm glad I got to watch bits of the anime, and it even reminds me of a bit of Banana, which is a guilty pleasure of mine. I hope at some point that this game gets a full translation patch, much like the anime, but until that time comes, it's a very enjoyable 40-minute experience, and the gameplay, while not complex, isn't mindless. Plus, Dogtato is just adorable. How could I say no to him? A. Bobble. This game, I am so very mixed on. Because the gameplay loop is very fun, and a good 50% of the game is very solid, but if you get to the end by yourself, oops, you should have brought a friend along. Not only that, but you don't even get the true ending at that point. Looking up the instructions on what you're supposed to do is just very unclear. You fumble around until you accidentally bump into the super mode and play through another 100 levels. But genuinely, it is a really fun game. I think it's the kind of game that if it wasn't cryptic for the sake of being a cryptic NES game, it would have been genuinely fun from start to finish. Many of the levels past 50 are tough, and some are cryptic on how you beat them, but it's nothing that enough retries and continues can't solve. I think I just want a different iteration of the same core gameplay, but something where it isn't heavily marred by that early NES game design. It's a B. Space Bust-a-Move. Same characters, new franchise, and new game genre. Space Bust-a-Move is a puzzle game that is one of the best Bust-A-Move games I've played by far. Granted, I haven't played that many Bust-A-Move games. It comes feature-filled for a DS puzzle game, with multiple unique game modes, really nice sprite work, and the star of the show, a story mode. I love random stories shoehorned into my puzzle games, and this one doesn't disappoint. There are many fantastic character designs, the levels are pretty fun, and there's even boss fights, taking advantage of the DS's second screen. If you're looking for a Bust-A-Move game on the go, there's no finer way to play it than Space Bust-A-Move. A for me. Luigi's Mansion. The perfect spooky month game, and by far one of my favorites, Luigi's Mansion is a perfect game to play in October. That mix of spooky and goofy works well on the GameCube, and is one of the many experiments that Nintendo would do on their console. As for the game itself, it is a fun little game where the fun comes from exploring and learning what you need to do. Solve a small puzzle, capture a ghost, and save your brother Mario to win. But the way this is executed is magnificent. I previously reviewed the 3DS version, and I postulated that the GameCube version would have spirit control and visuals. And I was correct. Nothing beats the original feel and visuals. If you're looking to play Luigi's Mansion, stick with the original. The game easily gets an S from me. Five Nights at Freddy's 2. God. Here's the thing. I hate traditional horror games. I just don't like getting scared. It's not my cup of tea. My heart was pounding out of my chest as I played. All this to say that it definitely succeeds as a horror game. Between the atmosphere and the sound, it's perfect for the spooky season. As for the gameplay, it's also stressful, but not entirely because of the heavy management like the last game, although that is part of it. No, the issue is mostly that you can get screwed over so easily by the animatronics not leaving you alone. You never truly feel confident that you were able to get them to go away. Like with Foxy, how do I know that I've flashed my light enough at them? Or with Withered Bonnie, how do I know that I've pulled down my mask fast enough? When I did eventually win, it didn't feel like I mastered the mechanics. It feels like I got lucky, which is just not the greatest feeling. I think I prefer the simplicity of that first game a bit more. I'm not a super fan of this one. It's a C. Pikmin 4. This is one of my most anticipated games of this year, and I beat it 3 months after it came out. In all honesty, the game came out at like a super busy time for me, so I'm glad I finally got the chance to finish it, and like, wow, what a fantastic game. With the beautiful environments to the engaging gameplay, and even the music, to even a lot of the writing, I was hooked once I started getting deep into the game. Games don't come out often that feel like they were made for me specifically, and Pikmin 4 was that game. I loved all the game modes, from the main story to the Dandori battles to the night missions, and even the underground segments. If I had a complaint, it's the lack of full cooperative multiplayer like Pikmin 3 Deluxe, but it's more of a nitpick more than anything, and I hope it'll be added in some kind of future update. Not much more I could ask for. Just go pick up the game for yourself, please. I want Pikmin 5 now. S. Panorama Cotton. My initial thoughts after beating this game is, I have no idea what happened, but it was fun. The game is a very enjoyable shoot-'em-up where you shoot stuff from an over-the-shoulder perspective. My only real gripe is that perspective, as sometimes things seem to hit you when it looks like you should have just barely scraped by, and sometimes shots don't land because you aren't lined up correctly. This doesn't make the game impossible, not even close, as the game gives you plenty of hits before dying, and you can even earn those life points back by shooting enemies. I paid like $3 for this game, and For what you get, I think it's a pretty fair price. It's a pretty easy B rank. Monkey Magic. This game is not one of the best PS1 games I've ever played, but I wouldn't call it bad. I think the theming of doing a Journey to the West style game is awesome, and I think some of the ideas the game had are really good, like unlocking unlimited lives and magic use. The voice acting is good, and the animated cutscenes are fun, but then there were some ideas that I greatly disliked, like the stage collectibles being required to save the game, the camera being far too zoomed in, and you sink like a rock after every jump. The story doesn't really conclude nicely also, it kinda just happens and then it ends. I think overall it's a fine game, nothing that'll like really blow you away, but if you see it for cheap, it's not a bad pickup, with some creative maze-like levels and some fun puzzles. You really could do a lot worse on the PlayStation. It's an easy B ranking for me.
Oh yes, I forgot. You're just a weak little monkey. All right, back to school.
Rhythm Doctor. I don't even know how to describe my feelings for Rhythm Doctor, but I did have to put them on the paper for this review. Dude, I freaking love this game! From the characters, to the music, to the visuals, to the story, the controls are so simple, yet the game is so complex. It takes a simple idea and builds it throughout the whole thing. It's so stylish and rewarding. It's not even done yet! The game's in early access, which means they're still actively working on it. I can't even tell you the emotions this game brought out of me. And I can't even fully describe them. If you love a good, no, fantastic rhythm game as much as I do, please check out Rhythm Doctor. I give this game an
S+.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Journey. It's a weird game to say I've played in 2023, especially as it's the last game I finished this year. I'll explain why, but first I want to give you a little spoiler warning, if you haven't played it. I think it's better to experience blind. Okay? Cool. Journey is a beautiful game. By far one of the best games I've ever seen on the PS3. From the locales to the music, it's all well crafted and is insanely beautiful. The story, although not a single word is uttered, is a moving experience, as it shows you, the player, how the people lived in harmony and their own lust for innovation led them to resent each other and led them to their own extinction. All that is left is the structures that were tall enough to not get buried by sand, and you get to explore these cityscapes on your own. The game is not all doom and gloom. Actually, it's an exploration about how life will preserve, even though this civilization is no longer around. You are, and you get to do what nobody has done before. Complete the journey. Once you complete the journey, you're brought all the way back to the beginning. You're meant to find random players over the internet while on your journey, but playing this game in 2023 was hauntingly quiet. The game is beautiful, and it still has me thinking about it days after, so I think that's just an S from me. Lethal Company. I know normally my reviews for games are after I've beaten them, but I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about one of my favorite multiplayer games this year. There is a reason this game blew up so fast, and it's because of the fun gameplay loop, where I get to play with all my friends. I also think that the game is a perfect mix between silly and scary, and it even makes my collector brain all happy, where you just collect items to bring them back to your ship without dying. The game is an easy recommendation from me. I've never had a game make me feel every emotion in such a short amount of time, from joyous to scared to angry. It's impressive, to say the least. The only concern that I have right now is the amount of content. While the game does have a pretty good modding scene to add more content, even I know that modding your game can be a little messy if you're not used to it. The base content is good enough for the time being, but I can find it becoming stale if more isn't added. But for the meantime, it's a uniquely cooperative experience that we don't see very often nowadays. And for that, I just had to give it a small shout out. A rank from me.
Yo, he found him! Let's go! Dylan! The items! Dylan!
He doesn't know any better.
Hey, thanks for watching the video.
especially if you stuck all the way through to the end. It's a big video, so it's a lot of work, and I really appreciate if you watch the whole thing. As for the best games I played this year, it was definitely Rhythm Doctor and Pikmin 4. Just amazing. I loved Rhythm Doctor. I'd say it shocked me a bit more, but Pikmin 4 was like essentially everything that I wanted in a new Pikmin game, and I got it, so I'm very, very happy. As for projects right now, there's a couple videos in the pipeline. I've definitely got one that I would like to maybe get out next month or something in that time frame, but definitely the Game Gear video is still coming. I finally have a way to record the footage of those, so looking forward to that. Once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you very soon. Have a good night, everybody.